And it becomes a bigger thing because fame is tricky because you read what's said about you, then you know what you know to be true, and the lines start to blur.
Hello. So, today we're going to be talking about media. I've been working in the media for over a decade at this point, and as a writer, you go through different aspects of media when you're looking for gig work. You could find yourself at any given moment working for a lot of different places. You could either be working directly for the media, or you could find yourself working for a brand who is basically trying to get media exposure. And this creates all sorts of blurred lines that people are really not that aware of. And having seen behind the curtains, there's a point where I've gotten really disillusioned with everything that goes on behind the scenes of the media. But I do happen to know the difference between all of the different types of all the different players, I guess, that are playing around in the media and what they're all doing. And so that's what we're going to be kind of dissecting today so that you too can understand what the difference is between the media, marketing, and well, all of it, advertising and like what a brand wants versus what the truth is. And it all boils down to money. As a ghostwriter and as a freelance writer, there where I get the money from is going to depend on, or is going to dictate what I do. Who's my client, and what am I trying to do? The problem that we have with all of this is fake news. Ever since Trump became president, fake news has just become a hot button issue. It's something that everybody is talking about, and the term's thrown around a lot, but I don't know whether or not everybody really understands what fake news is. The term is greatly overused. There are people who essentially, anytime anything bad is written about them, they will call it a lie. I've experienced this multiple occasions. I have gone through so many times where anytime I'm reporting on something good, or I'm reviewing something, something gets a good review when I'm working as a critic, uh, people get really happy. They promote it around their channels. They tell everybody. They brag about how they were in the news. As soon as you give somebody a bad review, they start saying that you're a liar, that it's libel. Well, very few people actually call it libel, which is what it is when it's written. A lot of them just say defamation, and they're incorrect. That is not the correct term to use for that. And either way, I mean, what they're saying is coming across. They're saying that if anything's bad about me is said, it's fake news. And that's not true in any way, shape, or form, but that is the understanding that people tend to walk this earth with. Uh, Journalism is a difficult thing to do. Journalists have a really thankless job. You might be used to seeing the high profile journalists that end up on cable news, or writing for the front page of a big newspaper like the New York Times or LA Times. But there are thousands, tens of thousands of journalists all over the country that are out there doing thankless jobs, that are reporting on all of the hard things. They're digging through all of the legislature that's in the city, the state, and the federal government, the county, all of that. They're looking up police records, checking police scanners 24/7. They are looking up any court papers that are going on. They're constantly trying to find filings with the corporation commission in your state. They're looking at all the regulatory agency filings. They're looking at any company's press releases and their press sections so that they can find out exactly what's going on, and they're keeping tabs on everybody. They're interviewing everybody. Anytime something comes up that feels like it's newsworthy, they're calling the people involved. They're getting sources on either side, and they are doing what they can to report the story and make sure that people understand what's going on and why. Local news is important. It's extremely important. Any of the big events that you've ever seen reported on national news, they all started local. It was either a local journalist that exposed everything and brought the story, to the mainstream attention, or it was something that went viral on social media where a citizen journalist has come in and said that they wanted, so this is what's going on. They want people to know about it. And it takes a lot of fact checking. It takes a lot of research. Uh, when I've worked as a journalist, I can pull up one of my profiles here. This is with the Phoenix New Times. If you don't live in Phoenix and you aren't aware of what the New Times is, uh, it's the basically the leading independent investigative journalist outlet in Arizona. Arizona is where I live. Everyone's got their own their own local news. But in Arizona, this is one of the most respected newspapers, especially among the older generations, the Generation X and older. And it's really difficult to actually write this stuff for them. Their editors are extremely picky, and there's constant fact checking going on. There's legal that's looking at everything that I write. There's so much happening that it takes up a lot of time. I reached the point where I'm making $100 for each article, but I'm working for 2 weeks to get all of the information that I need and get all the interviews landed and all the information that's necessary to dig through all of the public records and get all that stuff done. A lot of people, I've seen it over the last 10 years, especially that there's a lot of lazy journalism happening. In the age of social media, speed is what matters, and there are a lot of people who will basically look to social media to get a lot of the news. Twitter is a really big platform from that. That's for the last 10 years. That's been not just a way to disseminate the news. It's been a source of the news for a lot of really big stories. You have the Arab Spring, you've got everything that was going on with Anonymous and all of the 0-day hacker leaks. There's been Occupy, that whole thing. This all happened on Twitter. Even before Trump was president, Twitter was a place that journalists considered their beat. You could simply report on what's happening on Twitter, and you could get a news story every single day. You can verify the sources; everything is there. You can put screenshots to the tweets and have everything that's going on right there, and that becomes its own thing. A lot of journalists, though, they will cheat. I have to use finger quotes when I say journalists because they're not actually going to the sources. The public record is the source. Public record is always the primary source that you want to go through, and most people don't know to even check that. It's lazy, and they don't realize that sometimes that even exists. Much less do they think to actually do the work that it takes to dig through all of these documents. But public record is an extremely important thing. That's how the news is made. I mean, even everything from your obituary to what laws are coming through and people's birth certificates, all of anything that is public record is there for the public record and needs to be disseminated for the public. But a lot of people, newer journalists, younger journalists, interns, you'll see do this a lot. They will source other news outlets instead. They basically, instead of going straight to the source, which is the public record, or in some cases social media, they will basically see what other outlets are writing about and essentially mimic them and source them. It starts to get to be a slippery slope. There are times where a specific outlet might come up with some sort of scoop or breaking news that everybody does need to report on. This happened with the Facebook papers, for example, most recently. I believe it was the New York Times or Washington Post. I don't remember who now. But it was one newspaper that initially leaked everything, and then everybody else kind of piled on. WikiLeaks did something similar to this when Julian Assange and the rest of that crew created WikiLeaks. the point was to create a public repository where everybody can go there, see the information. It's not necessarily public record, but they're acting as a public record database and allowing people to go in there and write about it. And then you have some outlets that will not allow WikiLeaks as a source, so then they start to source the sources. When you do that, when you source someone else's as a source, that like another news outlet, you're basically playing the telephone game. It might not be as noticeable when you only have the 1 degree of separation, which is the 1-to-1 me to you, and then you go and tell somebody what I said. So that's technically, I guess, 2 degrees of separation. Let me get that straight. But the 1 degree of separation is the direct source is what you want. When you go to the 2nd degree, you're getting a source of a source, and you're playing the telephone game. If you're not familiar with the telephone game, what happens is you pass a message, you whisper it into somebody's ear, you go through the circle, and then by the time it gets to the end, the person says what it is, and it's usually laughable because it's nowhere near what the initial message was. Every time the person passes it, one person passes it to another person, you have degradation of that information. You have the one person is saying one thing and meaning one thing. The person who is hearing it is hearing something completely different. They might pick up on different aspects of the sentence. Different things are important to them based off of whatever their perspective is and their experiences in life. And as it goes along and you keep having the different people hear what they want to hear off of what the other person's saying that they wanted to hear, you get a completely different message. And that's the opposite of journalism. That's what ends up in the fake news category, because you have people who are basically spreading misinformation. They're not fact checking. They don't know 100% what the right person is. If the person really said it, they're going off of hearsay the entire time. And in court, you can't use hearsay. So in journalism, you should not be using hearsay either. All of this it's a battle. There's a lot of stuff that goes on where journalists are trying to keep all the facts straight. They're trying to talk to the people that are necessary, but there are people who are also looking out for their own brand image, especially when you get into, influential people or businesses that are involved in the stories. When you have two individual people, say there's a shooting, two private citizens shot each other, it really, their families will go and argue what they can, but I mean, on their own, they're not going to do that much damage. It's pretty easy to figure things out when you've got two private citizens. When you're dealing with corporations or with governments, any kind of major organization or influential people, a billionaire or a CEO, people who have power or some level of fame or infamy, then you start to get a lot of these private interests, basically, that everybody has. They're trying to save face. They're all trying to do reputation management. They're all trying to control their brand narrative. There's a lot of money that's involved. There's all sorts of other things that kind of get involved in the situation once you start reporting and doing journalism on there. There are several examples of where these corporate interests have been flexed and people have flexed their money and power on journalists. There's countless examples. One that pops in my head of last year, I believe it was when the LA Times had reported some stuff about Disney's employment practices. It was about Disney World, I believe, or Disneyland in Anaheim. And Walt Disney Corporation was not happy with that, so what they did in return to retaliate was to ban any of the LA Times critics from being able to see the press screeners for a movie. If you've ever watched any movies, the release dates, there's always, the day of the release, there's always going to be, every newspaper in the world is going to be talking about the movie in one way or another. They're going to have the box office and the review of the movie. This happens with TV shows, books, any of that stuff, music. And the reason they're able to do it so fast is because they have early access. I have access to about 6 months right now, of a solid 6 months. It goes out a year, but a solid 6 months of what the release calendar is for Hollywood. And at any given moment, I can go pick whatever is out there and figure out, talk to the PR reps and get that early access to the information. And by doing that, all of that's a speed related thing. People want to know what the next Marvel movie is or the next Star Wars movie from Disney. And by blocking the LA Times out of being able to do that, they're essentially attacking the company's marketing, its own as a media outlet. If it can't report on Disney, if it can't see the movies and get the reviews, people are going to read the reviews elsewhere. And those reviews are important. Movies are important. They make a lot of money. A lot of people watch them. It gains a lot of traffic. That's why I use a lot of Hollywood stuff on this channel and some all my channels, because I know that these are the topics that people actually care about, and I find ways to get my own information and my own perspective in there. But really, I mean, when I write about something like the foreclosure crisis, there are very few people who are actually worried about the foreclosure crisis versus who's trying to figure out information on what the new Star Wars or Marvel movie is. They have infinitely larger audiences, and this all kind of goes into marketing and SEO and all this kind of stuff, which is where we're going to take this entire conversation anyways, because the media outlets have their own need for marketing. Even though media outlets are big platforms that are often used for advertising and marketing, I'm going to use marketing as a generic term to also talk about advertising, but they are separate things. And any corporation, marketing and advertising and SEO, content marketing, PR, all of this is these are all separate departments that are run on there. But when you are working by yourself, when you're a small business, when you're an entrepreneur, any of this stuff, you're a solopreneur, you're doing all of it. And they all kind of blend into each other anyways. They all need to work with each other. But the newspapers and news outlets in general, news blogs, here, pull this thing back up. It's all of it. The internet, radio, television, newspapers, magazines, the media. It's one of the most effective ways to market anything and advertise anything. They have full page advertisements. They have sponsored posts. They have press releases. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of room for people to be able to spend some money and get some exposure. That is what the general idea of what marketers want. They are creating commercials. They are creating all sorts of different newsletters, magazines, all these kind of things, articles, thought leadership. And they're doing everything they can to get people's attention, to get their brand in front of people's attention. There's basically what's a sales funnel. And it starts at the top with, reaching the widest possible audience, and then you just kind of funnel them down into the topic of eventually buying something from you. And that's what's going on. Whenever you see like a Super Bowl commercial, whenever you see ad pop up anywhere where you're surfing the internet, that was money that was spent by these companies in order to get viewed. Back in the day, the media was the only place to do it. Internet is still part of the media at this point, but it was the mainstream media was the only way that you were ever going to get any kind of exposure and reach a mass audience. You had to be on mainstream radio, you had to be on mainstream TV, and you had to be in mainstream magazines and newspapers. That was it. There was no internet. And the internet has popped up, and sites like Google and Facebook are the two biggest advertisers and marketer platforms in the entire world at this point. And what they've effectively done is take a lot of that money from the media outlets. Google is through its AMP program alone, AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages. That program alone, what they did was make the internet work faster on your websites when you're looking on your mobile phone. And how they did it was by removing all of the JavaScript and everything else, and then redirecting all the traffic to Google, to their own servers. Now, AMP is an open source technology. It could easily have been implemented in any other way. You could put it on your own site and not have to use Google servers. But if you want to be seen through mobile search, which is where most people are doing their searches on Google, on mobile, that's 99% of the searches, you have to be using an AMP page. You have to host your content on Google. And in doing that, they've basically robbed about 70% off the top line of what the advertising marketing revenue used to be for the media. I've had this happen to my own site. I had my website before the AMP program, and so when AMP got rolled out, I watched as my traffic basically plummeted because I needed to get I mean, it wasn't even my traffic. My traffic stayed the same, but my advertising revenue plummeted because I needed to basically get rid of my ads and host my content on Google servers in order to be seen. Now, major publications, this is just me by myself, major publications like New York Times or LA Times, things like that, Washington Post, they also have this problem. They are finding that they're having a lot of trouble maintaining any kind of marketing within their platforms. These two, New York Times and LA Times specifically, as far as I am aware, have multi-million-dollar payments that they got from Facebook just to start creating original content on Facebook, and this is how they're having to basically compete in today's world. Is that all of the media outlets are like Huffington Post and New York Times for sure, both on Facebook, getting paid like several $1,000,000 to create live content, and BuzzFeed and all that, and there's people doing it on YouTube, which is a Google thing. They're doing it on Twitter. They're doing anything they can to do off-platform news. It's not as simple as what it used to be, where they just print out the newspaper, or they throw everything on their channel. They have to go onto all these other platforms also. And so these companies are spending a lot of money on marketing. They're spending a lot of money on. They're losing a lot of money too on not being able to host things on their own sites and having it consumed outside of their own sites. Even when they do have something, I mean, it's not even just Google on the mobile phones. You've got Apple too, through Apple News Plus. That's pretty much an important revenue source for some of these outlets like Wired and Washington Post. But then you've got like the New York Times, if I remember correctly, is one of the ones that is not that's boycotting that refuses to allow any of their information on Google News Plus or Apple News Plus. And this is all about, maintaining their top line revenue the entire time for all of these companies. That's what they're doing. They're all looking out for themselves. And this is just between all of the advertising companies, like the mainstream media versus the internet media platforms and social media platforms. And every other brand, I mean, every brand markets. It doesn't matter whether you're B2B, business to business, or business to consumer, B2C. It doesn't matter what you sell, what you make, whether it's products, services, or whatever it is. There's marketing that's involved. There is the raising awareness of your company, and there is, finding clients, onboarding new clients. That is something that everybody's doing. And the way that it's done on the internet these days, it's a variety of things. It's no longer just publishing in the newspaper. There are very few companies. The biggest industry that actually publishes directly in a newspaper is cannabis. And that's because cannabis can't advertise or market any of the places that every other company can. They can't get billboards. They can't run commercials. They can't do any of this stuff because it's still a federally illegal drug, regardless of what the states think. And depending on what city you're in, what state you're in, there's all sorts of different regulations as to where a cannabis company can operate. But generally, where they can market is on advertise and market is in newspapers. And so what you have is a bunch of people now who are spending money other places. They're spending money on Yelp. They're spending money on Amazon and eBay and any of these like Poshmark and Pinterest. Any of these marketplaces, they're trying to get views there. They're targeting people through Google Ads. They're targeting people through social media. They're getting everything listed on Google My Business and to get into Google Maps and Apple Maps and getting it listed everywhere online. It's like the new telephone directory, essentially. And all of this money used to go to directly to the government and to the media for any kind of advertising, our mainstream media. And now it's spread out a lot, drastically across a lot of companies. I mean, we're talking about Google and Facebook as being the largest, but they're far from the only ones that are advertising platforms that are competing with the media. The media is even using companies like Outbrain, which is, as you're scrolling through any of these media sites, you're going to find like recommended around the web or sponsored content, things like that. And that's what is it, Tableau and Outbrain, I think, are the biggest. I can't even think of the word right now, but there's a type of marketing for that. Chumbox advertising. They're the biggest providers of that. So you've got, in order to make money and get more advertising revenue, you'll have a lot of newspapers who are like I want to say it was The Verge and Wired were two I recently was reading about, where they're talking about specifically Tableau and Outbrain and Chumbox advertising and how it can lead to fake news. It's all those kind of like, you lose 100 pounds in 100 days. Read this article on miracle cure or whatever, blah blah blah. And it's all these outrageous kind of claims, and they're within the media outlets themselves, because they pay well. They pay at a cost per click, or revenue per click for them, but they pay at a cost per click rate, which pays a lot more than the cost per view. Actual engagement and referral purchases are always the best thing that marketers are looking for. And so the media is kind of creating its own issue right there with spreading fake news just through Outbrain and Tableau. This is them essentially, instead of having a well-defined ad within, or a sponsored post within their advertisement, really, like a banner ad within their website, what they're doing is they're essentially referring traffic to other websites just for money, because they need money. They got all their money taken from them by Google and Facebook and all these other places, and they're struggling. They need to figure out how to pay these fact checkers and these researchers and all these investigative journalists. And on top of this, you've got, I mean, any business can create a blog. That's if you go and look up anything about marketing online, they're going to tell you the very first thing when you have a website is to create a blog, because you need to have something that you can reference back to whenever you're doing any kind of marketing. And they've gotten it down to where, I mean, there are very specific types of marketing. You have content marketing, you've got social media marketing, and then you've got SEO. Now, SEO is search engine optimization. This is something that everybody with a website is doing in one way or another. People are even doing this when they only have a profile on a social media site. There's different types of SEO. There's the general internet SEO, and then there's on-platform SEO. And then there's off-platform SEO, which is basically your on-platform is your website, off-platform is everything that's not your website, to get everything directed to your website. And the media is a very big part of SEO, because when the most trusted websites at the very top, when you're looking at any of the Google search engines, they're looking at government websites, they're looking at education websites as the most reliable information, the academics and the government. And after that, you have basically the site ranking of whatever website is on there that's ranking well for whatever topics that are there. The media and Wikipedia are the biggest websites. I mean, besides social media, they're the biggest websites when it comes to having backlinks and having things linking to their information. And that's because they're the sources of reference that we have. They're the public record, essentially. I mean, most people aren't looking at the government notices and any of that, but they are reading the media, and the media is how they're getting their information. It's how they're building their perspective of what's real in this world. And what media outlets you pay attention to does have a big difference in what you believe as fact and what you think is fake news. A lot of them, especially when you get into politics, I mean, this doesn't get that bad on any other place but politics. When you have business news, finance news, any other kind of entertainment news, you will never, ever hear any of them ever badmouth each other. Brands basically go out of their way not to badmouth each other. There's laws that are in place with the FTC and FCC that kind of go into this, but when you get into politics is a whole other world from everything else that's going on, because you will constantly have everyone on the left saying that everyone on the right is fake news, and everyone on the right is saying that everyone on the left is fake news. They're going back and forth against each other and saying that they're not reliable sources. Like, nobody's trying to complain about like Wired or CNET. Nobody's arguing whether those are legitimate sources of The Verge, because tech outlets don't play that game like that. They're not playing dirty politics. But you will constantly hear people like Fox News and CNN reference each other as being fake news or real news. Either way, when you're a business, they don't care one way or another. They're looking at essentially the traffic that's going into these websites. So whether it's the left or the right or in between, they really don't care as long as they're talking about the topic that's related to their business. So McDonald's, for example, they sell hamburgers, and at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference to them what somebody's political leanings are. They want you to eat. Everybody's got to eat every day, and they want to be the ones who feed you. And so they're trying to put McDonald's all over everything. And SEO is basically it's the new science of how everyone is tracking basically all of this marketing initiatives, all of the content marketing, all of the media outreach, and all of this. And this is how search engines are determining that you have domain authority, or that you have site authority when they're or page authority, when they're going through and checking, like, okay, you have this information, but is it original information? Is this something that people are actually referencing? Are people finding it useful? SEO is kind of like the internet's ranking system. Like on something like Facebook, it's very easy to see, or YouTube, like there's an up button, up vote, and a down vote, and you can see whether people find it useful that are watching it or consuming it, reading it on Facebook. But on the general internet, you don't really have that. Every website's not really letting you know what people think about what they're doing. And so the robots and the search algorithms, they're using the engagement. They're using what you're doing after you're reading this. Are you going to look up more on the topic? Are you clicking through the sources that are in there to research more of the topic? Or are you just starting a fresh Google search or going back? They're tracking how much time you're spending on there. All sorts of stuff is really getting into there. And so what businesses have found to do, and you can go look up how to do SEO on anywhere that you want, really. You're going to find the same information from people like Jeff Billis and Neil Patel and any of these marketing and SEO agencies. They're all going to tell you the same basic things. And their companies are now approaching a lot of their marketing from an SEO perspective. Like they really need that one-to-one relationship in order to justify their return on ad spend or their ROI for their marketing. And so they really love these SEO initiatives because it's quantifiable. They're able to put it in a graph, see whether the graph is going up or down, and make whatever business decisions they need about spending. SEO is something that is necessary for everybody to understand, because I mean, this is when you talk about manipulating the information, manipulating the media. This is the biggest way that it's actually done, is through SEO initiatives that people are doing. And so what you have on the other end of this is that's specifically related for the media. It's more than SEO, but it does kind of fit into all of this, and that's public relations. So what companies are doing is, in addition to putting marketing out there, when you get something like most recently, I think I've seen the Samuel L. Jackson Capital One ads. So that's a marketing thing. That is an influencer marketing thing. Essentially, is Samuel L. Jackson's an influencer. He's an influential person. He's a celebrity, and Capital One is putting him on there. They're creating scripts. They're telling him what to say. They control all of it, and they're putting out the ads. Now, public relations kind of works the other direction, where they're controlling what the brand narrative is in all of the other platforms. They're making sure that, for example, if something happens with Facebook is changing their name to Meta as a company, they've got a whole PR team that's all they're doing is basically fielding calls from the media and putting out press releases and giving the interviews and doing whatever it takes to explain to everybody all of the questions that they might have about why Facebook is becoming Meta. And they do this because if they don't go out there and do this, I mean, the media outlets have their own idea of why this is going on. I have a video about this very specific topic explaining why it's going on, that it's not even a brand thing of why they're doing this. It's a legal thing. They're doing it to protect themselves from antitrust. It's a legal defense that we're watching happen in real time. And we know this because the FTC already has two now. One was thrown out by court, but there's two different lawsuits that they have pending against, or antitrust lawsuits that they have pending against Facebook. And now they have to switch it over to Meta, and some of their arguments are going to be a little bit harder. And now they've got a very expensive marketing push that involves a lot of public relations with the internal team essentially telling anybody what they need to know about why Meta is Meta and the rebrand. And they're going to focus it all on the metaverse. They're going to focus it all on Oculus and VR and all this other stuff. But it really boils down to a legal defense against their antitrust suit and the the monitoring that they do, just the mass privacy issues that are involved with that entire company. And Meta is a great way to explain it, is that they're using this data to put a digital overlay in front of the real world. And it's not as simple as virtual reality, though. But all companies have this. All corporations do. When I've worked in banking industry, we had everything that was centralized. And so if any employee had anything go on, they had to come through me as a manager, and then I had to go through a centralized HR to essentially go through and figure out what would be said or what could be done. Any kind of mass internal communications had to be passed through them, and any kind of external communications. I mean, most companies have something in the employment contract that specifically forbids you from talking to the media about it. If you say anything to any media outlet, no matter what, even if you're trying to say it's good or bad, when you work for a corporation, you're going to be in trouble with your employment contract, and that's a pretty standard thing. So you've got all of these people that are trained in media relations. That's what they do. They go through and they get the interviews out there, and they go beyond just press releases. Press releases are released by corporations for any kind of thing, but they typically just post them on their website, and that's it. I mean, people will pick it up, they'll go through and they'll read everything. But press releases are a really important part of how information is disseminated, especially for national corporations. Like I don't know that any small business really needs to use a press release, but for major corporations, like, press releases are everything. That's how as a financial journalist or investment or stock market journalist, people like Jim Cramer, even myself, like what I've had to do in my life as a journalist was check a lot of those press releases to find out about earning statements and any kind of buyouts that happen, for like when a major corporation buys another corporation, any mergers, replacements of the C-suite. There is, I mean, a lot of stuff that is solely done through press releases. And so these press releases are super important, and they come up all the time in day-to-day work when you're working in the press. My entire email is basically press releases. I get hundreds of them every single day from all over the world for everything that's coming out, for any kind of movie that's coming out, any kind of TV show, music, books, any kind of products and services, apps, all that kind of stuff. Anybody who ever hires like a PR agency to get any kind of press, they're going to basically, one of the first things they're going to do is email their media list, and I'm on most of those media lists, so I end up basically just getting buried under press releases, and that becomes its own thing. Just like people had there's some new age millennial and Gen Z journalists who just use Facebook or Twitter as their beat. As a beat reporter, I could sit here and just be a beat reporter just off of press releases, essentially. And the problem with that is that, I mean, I can go through and talk to the company, and they make everything very accessible. However, I'm still only getting the one side of it. When you go through and you're only talking to the brand, you're only getting one source, no matter how many people you're talking to for the brand, and it's still the brand's representatives. And so you always have to get another source. You always have to talk to somebody else about this press release. You've got to check at a bare minimum fan reaction on certain things, or go through and find some other person who can actually discuss what is going on, because otherwise you're just writing another press release for these people. And not every journalist is doing that. Not every journalist is actually, not every outlet is really being as stringent as you would think they would be about this. Just like there are people who are going to secondary sources and playing the telephone game, there are people who are just listening to the one source and not bothering to get other sources, and they end up just becoming a promotional tool. this has become a problem over the last 10 years, and there's been a lot of pushback from the media basically on all of this. I've been involved in a lot of on both ends of the spectrum here for the media and for the brands, and I can tell you just from watching my own career and the work that has come through and all of the different outlets that I'm constantly checking every day and watching the trends in, that all that's changing. It's not as easy as it used to be. There were a lot of content marketers, PR reps, and SEOs that they would go and get a byline in a place like Huffington Post, Forbes, a million different places there are, but those are two of the biggest right there. But they would sit there and continuously use that outlet to make money. They would get paid by clients to write about what they needed to write about, and it got to the point where there's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of news that you cannot trust because there are a lot of interest, financial interests that are involved in all of this. So you have these people who are basically trained to control the narrative, to manipulate the media. Then you have on the other side people who are trained to see through all of that and get all sides and put what's actually of public interest out. And that fight is the main fight of what's going on with all of fake news, with everything that you've ever heard or seen about fake news. That is the intersection of public relations, marketing, and journalism in the media, where there's all sorts of different interests that are butting heads and trying to get out the point that they want to get out and the narrative that they want to put out there. And eventually, I mean, it all ends up being this mismatch where you, as the average person, as the average viewer, as the average reader, as the average consumer, and average citizen, are not able to really tell what the difference is between what's real news and what's fake news, what's journalism, what's editorial, what was done by an editorial by the head editor of the New York Times certainly carries more weight than an editorial from McDonald's, who is clearly there to sell you McDonald's. The New York Times editorial will be very inside baseball, wonky information about the news and the media and how their business is going and things that are of public interest because they are the media. The same goes with a politician. Anything that a politician is writing is definitely going to be news in itself, even when it's an opinion, because news will be based off of what a politician's opinion is. But then when you get something that the people at Facebook that they're writing an editorial, or the people at McDonald's or any of these other places, any of the PR reps, the marketers, the SEOs, they're doing it for a very specific purpose. They're doing it to be promotional. They're doing it to promote themselves, to get themselves more clients, to get their brand recognition, to do all of these other things. And it's not the same thing. And every single part of it, it's clear that there's a difference in there. And it's not I mean, it's clear for me because I'm behind the scenes of everything, and it's clear for anyone who's working in these outlets. But for the average person, it's really not. The average person can't tell the comics from the actual the headline news. They can't tell the ad or the sponsored content from the investigative journalism. They don't know the difference. And a lot of them aren't even going through to these mainstream outlets. They're going through to smaller websites that are even more shady about it. And it's even harder to see because they're even more desperate for money. They have smaller audiences. And there's all sorts of things that are going on these days, especially when you start to add AI into the mix and all of the money that is out there and all the tech that is possible. You have citizen journalists that are legitimate journalists that are doing a really great job of documenting what's happening in their locality. And then you have major corporations or small businesses that are putting stuff out there that is meant simply to promote themselves. And as a regular person, it's your job essentially to fact check things. You've got to go through more than one site, and you can't just keep going through to like Snopes and Wikipedia and just say like, okay, well, Snopes said it's cool or Wikipedia said it's cool. You're riding on the shoulders of giants at that point. You're trusting somebody else's information. You're taking it secondhand. Really, the public record is where you need to check very, very deeply for anything that you're looking for, because that is, I mean, that's the facts. That's what happened. That's what's on the government record. That's that is what is going to go down. That's what is going to be used as the truth moving forward, essentially. And sure, there are ways that you could question the public record. There are things that you can do, but I mean, overall, if you're depending on somebody else to do that work for you, you're going to be wrong every once in a while. You're going to get the wrong information here and there, and I mean, it's a dangerous game that you're playing by doing that. And I can't fault you for it. I mean, I know a lot of people that wake up every day, they read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or Bloomberg or things like that, and for them that is an important part of the news. But don't just read the news article itself. Go check their sources. Go look on the website. Go read the original press release. Go see what other facts and figures were left out. Because even when I was doing like deep on investigative journalism, there was a lot of stuff that I wasn't allowed to report on for the New Times. I mean, I was specifically covering the cannabis beat, and there's any anti-cannabis story that I would ever come up with, and it's not like I was making this shit up. I'm talking to the state legislators, and they're telling me that this is how they feel about things. And if it didn't fit into the story, basically, and it wasn't pro cannabis, the Phoenix New Times wanted nothing to do with it. They knew that their advertising, that 50% of their newspaper is covered with cannabis ads, and if they piss off the cannabis industry and they don't get that cannabis money, that they're out of business. And so they had to protect their interest. Even the most investigative journalist place is still protecting its corporate interests, just like anybody else. So you can't necessarily trust what's on there. I mean, I, as the reporter who's named on these articles, can tell you that not everything that's on there is the exact truth. There are things that got overlooked. I mean, there's no lies in there, but there's a lot of lies by omission in order to not make things look as bad as they really were, because that's at the end of the day. I mean, I was a freelancer who had a boss, and that boss had clients that he needed to get money from, and that overrides anything else. So no matter what trusted news source you think you're getting, it doesn't really make a difference. I mean, you can go through and find the most hardcore investigative journalist that you trust the most, who has a stellar record. They're still leaving out stories. You'll hear people constantly saying that they're talking about things that the mainstream news won't cover. It's not because, like, the person that's up there, the Bill O'Reilly or the Walter Cronkite or whoever it happens to be, it's not because they're not a reputable person. It's because they work for a boss, they work for a company, and that company's got corporate interests and has money that they need to make. So they're just not going to cover a lot of stories. They're just going to ignore it. They're going to ignore the news and turn their heads to it. And that causes, I mean, no matter who it is that you think that you can trust, you can't. You can trust them to a point, but their story selection alone says everything about where their actual bias lies within the booking decisions that they make on TV, within the stories that they're printing in their newspaper, what they're putting online. All of it has an inherent bias to it. And I mean, the bias this is all getting mixed in with people who are paid to essentially create a bias in favor of a brand, or in favor of a organization or an influencer or whatever it happens to be. All of these interests are constantly mixing, and the only person that you can really trust at the end of the day is yourself. That's why I practice gonzo journalism. I put myself straight into the mix of everything, and I tell my own life story, and the lens, I guess I tell the story of what's going on in the lens of my own life story. And it's the only way that I know how to do it, is to make sure that I'm laying out completely that this is my perspective on the facts as they happen, because I know that I have biases too. I know that just in picking what I'm choosing to talk about and what I'm choosing to publish, that there is an inherent bias in there. And I mean, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what to tell you about how this could all be fixed. All I can tell you is to be aware that this is a real thing that's going on. It's been going on for centuries. It's been going on long before there ever was a internet. There was printing press. There was, before that, there was just handing out books and scribes and passing the word along. But the control of information has been a thing for as long as humans have been around, and it's going to only keep going. So you've got to be vigilant. You've got to do your research, and you've got to really question your beliefs and question what you hear, and make sure that you're getting the right information from the right people, and don't ever trust anybody full carte blanche, because the fact is, you never know what information you're getting and what type of biases and what type of interests are involved behind the scenes.
That moment in someone's life where they're trying to
This has
figure
been
out
Typo
who they are,
today, and I
who
hope
they
you had a
are without
wonderful day.
emptiness.
Stay
It
tuned for
just
more
gets
news.
magnified, and it becomes a bigger thing because fame is tricky because you read what's said about you, then you know what you know to be true, and the lines start to blur.